Hello everyone, I'm Jessalyn Zoom. I'm from the Cooperative Program section of the Library of Congress. In the next hour or so, I will be presenting you on a session on CJK NACO personal name references. Before we get started, a couple of reminders. First, all the rules and examples we will be dealing with today are under the principle of AACR 2. This session does not discuss RDA, Resource Description Access, which is the future upcoming cataloging instruction. Second, not all the examples discussed here are live examples from the database, although most of them are. So don't be surprised if you cannot find the exact record in OCLC. Setting up correct heading form. Setting up the correct heading form is very important before even we are considering the references or variant forms for the heading. According to the rule, in general, we choose the name by which he or she is commonly known. This could be the person's real name, pseudonym, title of nobility, nickname, initials, etc., etc. And this commonly known form usually can be found from the chief sources of information. Now, if the forms of the name vary in fullness, we choose the form most commonly found, of course, as we just mentioned. But in the event you do not have a predominant form, what do we do? According to the rule, we choose the latest form. Now, in case of doubt about which is the latest form, choose the fuller or fullest form. Normally, if you have just one form and it appears on the chief source of information, the decision is straightforward. But if you have a case like what's showing on this screenshot here on this page, what do you do? So let's take a look and follow the little hand pointer here on this screen, on this record. In the first several 670s, as you just browsed, you see the author has used various forms of his name in his publication. Now, if you look at the last 670 field here, the cataloger has noted the usages, and we see there are 10 usages under the name HO, and there are 5 usages under the name HE, or I should say under the form of HE. So from this research or from this search, we know the predominant or most commonly known form for this author's name is the 10 usages, which is under HO. So indeed, back here in the 100 field, you see the cataloger set up the heading using the most commonly known form in the 100 field. Now I want to mention about the usages. Usages are referring to the 245 field in the bibliographic record in the C subfield for statement of responsibility. So that means the usages are the actual appearance, how the name is appeared in the source. Names written in non-Roman script. Now this session we are going to focus on names in the CJK language area. Now you may ask, are there any instructions in the AACR2 and LCRI covering this area? The answer is yes. So according to the rule, if the person's name or the author's name is likely to appear in the well-established English language reference sources, such as the Encyclopedia Americana or the Encyclopedia Britannica or the Academic American Encyclopedia, any of these forms or the forms found in any of these reference sources, use that form in your 100 heading form. Now, if the name is not found in all of these 3 reference sources, then we use the systematically romanized form of the name in the heading. So take a look at our first example, Confucius here. Obviously, this name Confucius has appeared in the English language reference sources. Thus, the 100 heading form is taken from the reference source. Now, our second example here, CAO, obviously there wasn't a established form that's different from this romanized form in the English language reference sources. So the 100th heading form, CAO, was the romanized form according to the ALA-LC romanization table. Now, most of the names we work today are either too recent to be appeared in the reference sources, or lots of times the authors are just one-time author published once, so they are not likely to appear in the English reference sources. So in these cases, that the default decision for us is to systematically romanize the form of the name, and we use that in the 100 heading form. Now, I want to note an important point, or I consider it important point here, which is for persons who carry the names that are derived from a non-Roman script, but who write in a Roman alphabet language, should not be considered under this rule. Okay, so those persons should not be considered under this rule. But if it becomes evident later on that most of the person's works were written in a non-Latin or non-Roman script, then we apply the provision of the rule that we just talked about here, which is using the English language reference sources, checking on that, and then systematically romanize the form of the name. Types of references. There are 2 types of references, 400C references and 500C also references. And the C references usually are given when the cataloger, or when we think the names or the form of the names might be reasonably sorted by the users when they search the database. So these are the C references. Looking at the example showing on this screenshot, you might have already recognized this is a Chinese name containing a non-Chinese given name. So according to the rule, the 100 heading form is set up under the surname followed by the non-Chinese given name. So then the cross-reference, which is the 400 we are considering here, are provided under the Chinese given name. And of course, you have the systematically romanized Pinyin form in the cross-reference, as well as the non-Latin character form in the 400. A special type of reference, 400 reference, and that is pre-AACR2 form of a heading, and they are usually coded under WNNA or WNNAA. Now, these are the headings that were authorized in the name authority file at the time of the changeover to the AACR2. So according to the guidelines, nowadays we do not trace a reference from the old catalog heading, but you will see the 400 which are coded under WNNA or WNNA form. Okay, so keep in mind we no longer make such a cross-reference from the old catalog form. Another special type of C reference is the previously valid AACR2 form of heading, and they are coded under WNNE. Now, you might ask, when do we need to consider using or giving the WNNE previously valid AACR2 form of a heading in the cross-reference area? Now, look at the screenshot to the left. You notice this is a Chinese heading. Remember what happened to a large number of Chinese name authority records back in 2000? It was Pinyin conversion project. So after the Pinyin conversion project, all the formerly Romanized form, which were Wade, Giles forms, all those formerly Romanized forms were coded under WNNE in the 400, which we call previously valid AACR2 form of a heading. So that was one instance where the WNNE form was used. Now, you might also think of women who change names at this point, or some of you have already remembered this kind of situation where we use the WNNE form. So sometimes when women change their last names after marriage, we usually change the 100 heading form to reflect the woman's husband's last name. Then the woman's maiden name will become the 400 WNNE form. So that is another situation where WNNE form is used. Now take a look at the screenshot to the right-hand side, which is the second screenshot we have here. You notice the WNNE form in the 410 here for a corporate body, of course, has a different place name qualifier. So what this says was that when the place name qualifier for the corporate body was changed, then that former form were coded or had become a WNNE form. So then the 110 form will have the latest place name qualifier for the corporate body. So this is another situation where WNNE form is used. The other type of references, as we mentioned earlier, are 500 seals reference. This is a reference where it's referring that the author's name or variant form of the name is the same as another author's variant or name. We looking at this example, so take a moment to look at these two screenshots here. I circled in red 100 and 500 here. You notice that the two authors share the same romanization of their names, and there isn't any information to help differentiate the same form between the 100 and earlier which was the 400, and in that case, this previous 400 reference would need to become a 500. So this is another situation where 500 field CO reference is used. Now, this is another situation where 500 CO reference is used. Again, take a look at the two screenshots of the two records here. You notice this is a situation where the author writes both under his or her real name as well as his or her pen name, which is the pseudonym. So in this case, when the author published under both names, we set up two name authority records and connect the two authority records or headings with the 500 field. Okay, so what happens with a fixed field when we consider or when we provide references, whether it's 400 or 500? Now, take a look at the second screenshot to the lower part of this page. You notice it's in the 0829 in the OCLC connection. Now, normally for all the headings that are without non-Latin script references, we code A when we have the 400 or 500 fields. Then we code N when we do not have either 400 or 500 fields. Now, to the above of the page, above the first screenshot, you see the screenshot that I am pointing with the arrow here. The reference status is for B. So I think you now know the reason and why we set B here. Until practices for the form and the style of non-Roman script references are established, all the name authority records with non-Latin script references will be coded and should be coded under B under the reference status. So this is how we consider reference status when we consider non-Latin script references. Okay, NACO normalization sounds like a new term. So what is NACO normalization and what does it do? The NACO normalization basically is a computer-aided process that eliminates all but the essential characters of a heading. And this process is called normalization. And during the normalization process, the computer removes all the combining diacritics and most punctuation and converts all the letters to uppercase letters and then make all the modified letters to their unmodified equivalents. But keep in mind, for subfield delimiters and subfield codes, they are retained in the normalized form. So when a new authority record or reference is added to the authority file, each heading or reference is compared against the heading and references already in the file. So the computer or the system will detect whether the new headings and references are allowed. In other words, no conflict. Now, all the PCC NACO libraries contributing to the LC NACO authority file have agreed to a set of rules for normalization, and these rules are highlighted in these little equations that I pointed out here. And that is, You cannot have a 100 field that is the same as another 100 field in a different authority record. And you cannot have the same 100 field with a 400 field in a different authority record. But a 100 field should be the same as a 500 field in a different authority record. And you cannot have the same 400 field and the 500 field in a different authority record. I did not add another equation here, and that is you can have the same 500 fields in different authority records. And we will talk a little bit more about that point later on. Okay, here might be a good test for you if you take a look at the screenshot of the record here. Pay attention to the two red circles here. The first circle, the form, has the hyphen in between the names, and the second circled form does not have the hyphen. So take a moment and think about the NACO normalization and decide whether you should provide both of the variant forms or just one of them. The answer is we only need to provide one of them. The reason is during the NACO normalization, the hyphen will be normalized as a space. So the result will be these two forms, with and without hyphen, will be normalized to the exact same form. So I hope you got that part right. Constructing reference. Constructing the reference in the same form as if chosen as the heading. Now the record, the example here that's showing you has the delimiter D for the date information. So this is kind of straightforward. When you construct a reference, you carry out the date information from the heading form. Now sometimes it can be confusing when you have the Q subfield or C subfield, such as the term of address and so on. So in those cases, you might want to be careful to make sure that that element is or is not part of the heading form. So you want to make sure construct the correct reference in the same form as if chosen as the heading. Primary element. Maybe this is another new term to some of you. So what is the definition on primary element, and what does it affect to our reference rules here? The rule says primary elements includes all the elements to the left of the comma, and I'm going to point my little hand here, all the elements to the left of the comma, and in the first element to the right of the comma. So we trace a reference from each variant that affects the primary element of the name. So think about primary element taking effect here needs to be considered when you provide a cross-reference. So according to the primary element rule, the record showing here, the cataloger did provide a correct reference according to primary element rule. If you take a look at the first element to the right of the comma, that's different from the heading form that's showing in the first element to the right of the comma. So it is allowed by the rule, and the cataloger provided the cross-reference. Now, for the most part, the reason why I mentioned that this might be a new term to you, because they may not likely to be needed in your routine or regular cataloging, because for the most part, you may not need to apply this rule because you work with the scripts, not alphabets, where the fuller forms of the names or compound elements of the names are often involved. But cases like this, what we're showing here, does come into play. So knowing this rule is important. This is another quiz for you on primary element. So take a look at the last 670, the red underlined here. We have two forms underlined. So the question for you is, after you provided the cross-reference for the form that's underlined in, that's under the first underlined, would you also consider a cross-reference for the form that's underlined in the second form, which is also showing in the yellow block here? Take a pause and think about your answer. The answer is no, because the first element to the right of the comma is Jack. So that is the same as the other reference form that you are provided, Jack. So this other form would not be needed according to primary element rule. Recording variant forms. Recording the variant forms, if they add information from chief source of information, other locations in the same item, or sometimes different items, for example, reference sources or internet search results. But remember, the references have to be justified in the 670 field unless they are called for by the rule. So in other words, references are traced only from the recorded forms. Now, sometimes catalogers run into a situation where the heading has a common sounding name. In that case, it's a cataloger's judgment whether that common sounding name should be provided in the reference. It's likely that the cataloger may provide it, so my point here is that they may not be required or called for by the cataloging rule, but it is a cataloger's judgment in that case to provide a reference from a common sounding name. Talking about the references, I also want to mention that searching reference is not required for establishing personal name headings. But when there's a conflict, or when you try to avoid creating undifferentiated heading, searching reference has become a routine practice, especially with the readily available information on the internet. But remember, don't fret, use judgment when to use references and when not to. Recording variant forms. Now, very often in the CJK language area, authors have courtesy names such as Zi or Hao. These Zi or Hao or courtesy names should be treated as references and are provided in the cross-reference under the 400 fields. So if you want to take a look at how the Zi and Hao type of courtesy names are constructed in the reference fields. And I used a little, again, red pen to highlight it, what has been provided in the 670 fields and what are being provided in the 400 fields. So you may take a look at it later on if you want to know the construction of this type of references. Recording variant forms. Again, in the CJK area, or maybe not alone in the CJK area, but another common situation in the CJK language area is that authors sometimes use pen names to either publish or just for internet use. Take a look at the first screenshot here. The author simply published under his or her pen name without disclosing his or her real name. So in this case, we set up a heading under the author's real name, and then the non-Latin script reference is provided in the reference field. And if you look at the second record here, you notice that the author did publish under his or her real name, but then another name, which is a pen name, became available on the internet page. So in this case, when that name became available, or you are aware of the other name from a source that you have checked with, you should provide a cross-reference from that pen name. So these are kind of a treatment for various names that you might be dealing with in the publications that you are working with. See also reference pseudonym. Now earlier we talked about some common situations using 500 fields. In the next few slides, we are going to discuss some of the more complicated situations on using 500 fields. Now this one, the first one, which I say it's not too bad, because you will know why they are not too bad. This is the author where he or she wrote under two different names. One is a real name, the other is a pseudonym. So the treatment for this type of pseudonym situation is that we establish two separate name authority records for the two names that the author uses in his or her publication, and connect the two names with the 500 fields that I'm pointing you here in two different records. So not bad situation, or not a complicated situation. Now let's take a look at another pseudonym situation using C also reference. What do we do when the author writes under 3 or more names? The treatment according to the rule is to create a name authority record for each name, then choose a basic heading, and then provide a 663 field for each name authority record using linking 500 references coded under W, N, and C. I'm pointing you here, so pay attention to these special coding, especially here. Okay, so for this record, this is a basic heading. About choosing the basic heading does not have to be the person's real name, although it could be, but it should be the most predominantly used name. So that's the criteria on choosing a basic heading. So let's take a look at our basic heading name authority record here. On this basic heading name authority record, the cataloger had a C also, which I'm pointing you out here, had a C also references from all the other headings or names being used. and then justify these COSO references or the other names in the 670 citations. And then the cataloger provides or needs to provide a 663 cataloger generated reference field listing all the other names that are being used using a formatted note, which we're showing here. So the 663 is a cataloger generated reference field, and it needs to list all the other names that are being used. Okay. Alright, so this is the treatment for the basic heading when the author writes under either 3 or more than 3 names. Now let's take a look at one of the other headings, not a basic heading. We just went over the basic heading. This is heading, I call it number 1 of the other names. Now in this heading, as you see, the 663 is pointing back to the basic heading. Okay, it's pointing back to the basic heading, which includes references to all of the names used by this person. And this same 663 field would be used on each of the name authority record that isn't the basic heading. So in other words, for all the other headings, the same 663 is used. Now, remember earlier we talked about NACO normalization, and I made a point that we could have a same 500 fields in different records. Now, take a look at the 500 here. Okay, so this is the 500 for referring to the basic heading. I'm going to have you take a look at the second heading other than the basic heading. So this is the heading number 2 of the other names. Again, take a look or pay attention to the arrow that's pointing out to the 500 field. You notice both records are pointing back to the basic heading. So this is where the same 500 fields are found in different records. So this is that situation where 500 fields can be the same in different authority records. Okay, see also references groups versus individual. Okay, this is saying that or refers to groups containing the name of one or more of its members. Okay, so you have a group name that's containing the name of one or more of its individuals. In this case, the treatment for this type of headings is to provide a COSO reference from the heading for each individual named to the group heading. And then in the other authority record, trace a COSO reference from the group heading to the heading for each individual. So let's take a look at an example here so that you have a clear picture of how the rule is applied in this situation for groups versus individuals. First screenshot, group heading. Okay, so if you notice for group heading that was set up under 110 as a corporate body, and if you notice this, the big red circle here, 2 500 fields are referred from the 2 individual names. And in this slide, you see 2 separate records. 2 separate records. I'm moving back this a little bit so you see both records in its entirety. Okay, so this screen shows 2 records for the 2 individuals. And if you notice the red circle, both records are referring to the heading for the group name. So this is how the group versus the individual heading situation are taken care of. Okay, our third complicated situation using 500 field is about head of state. Now we all know sometimes a head of state also has his or her private communication, such as memoirs or autobiographies. And how should we handle that situation? Okay, we have two records showing you how this situation is being handled. Again, I'm moving the bar a little to the top of the page so you see a more complete record here. Okay, now let's take a look at the record to the right, which is a record heading for the corporate body. Now you notice the 500 is referring to the author's personal name. So obviously this is a heading that's being set up for the author or for his official title as a government entity. Okay, now take a look at our record to the left. You see it's a 100 field. Okay, so this is a heading for a personal name for his personal or private communication. Now you notice the 510 is provided here to connect this record for its individual to its official title as a government entity to the right. So again, this is how the situation is handled when you have a head of state and when the head of state also has its private communication when you need to set up two headings. Resolving conflict. Sometimes the form of the reference conflicts with the established heading, and you can resolve the conflict simply by using the dates in the reference only. In that case, you don't have to even change the heading form. So here's a good example showing when you need to add reference information to reference only, such as the date. We have the name authority number 2 that's in conflict with the reference field in the name authority number 1. And a internet search result which is showing in the second 670 field here has a author's birth date information available. So in this case, we do not need to change the heading in the 100 for name authority number 1. All we need to do is to add the date to the reference field where it is in conflict with the authority number 2 in its heading form. So this is another rule that you want to keep in mind about adding information to reference only. Resolving conflict, see also reference. Sometimes we do not have any information or enough information to break the conflict between a 100 and a 400. In that case, 500 see also reference needs to be used. So here's an example. You look at the authority record number 1. Again, we have the conflict between the reference 400 to authority record number 2, 100 heading form. In this case, the cataloger went to reference sources but did not find information to break the conflict. So the 400 becomes a 500 to avoid the conflict or to resolve the conflict. Resolving conflict, Pinyin versus Giles forms. So we all know the Giles forms is the former Romanization scheme. In this case, I have to say this is a probably unusual situation. It doesn't happen often, but it's good to know how to handle the situation if it happens or if you run into. So what happens here is that the cataloger's 100 heading form is the same as the 400 WNNE form, which is the former Romanization form. And in this case, the way to resolve the conflict between the 100 and 400 field is that we remove the 400 former Romanization form, and then we provide a 667 field to indicate the previously valid AACR2 heading form. So that way the information is retained, but we did not have to necessarily keep the former Romanization form. Adding date to the heading. Now remember we talked about the WNE form. As a matter of fact, we just went over from the previous slide. So the WNNE form and also the WNNA, the pre-AACR2 form of heading, or we sometimes call it old catalog heading form. Now, because those two forms, the WNNE and WNNA, those two forms are formally authorized heading form, so they should not be altered in any way. So in this case, when the cataloger decided to close the death date, or sometimes just to add the date to the heading, make sure the 400 WNNE or the WNNA form should not be changed. In other words, do not add the date to the reference forms in those two coding form. Providing information in the 667 field. Sometimes it is helpful to provide a 667 field note to record the research result that was done. And in this case, if you note the cataloger added a 667 field to alert the other catalogers that he or she has done research but could not identify its author to the other similar author in the similar time range. So it can be helpful to identify the relationship with other similar names by providing a 667 field. For the complete list of the formulated nodes of 667 field, please check the DCMZ1, and you will find a whole list of the information about the 667 field there. What are some of the confusing areas? Now, one of the confusing areas that I see catalogers often run into is what's showing here. Okay. Now check out the record in the screenshot here. You notice the author's real name is made available, or we know the author's real name, but the author writes only under its pen name. In this case, we create only one authority record for the author's pen name, and then provide the author's real name in the 400 cross-reference. So this is an area where I often see catalogers might be confused. So pay attention to this area if you ever work with authors that write under pen names. Author's name in different languages or different Romanizations. This is another potentially confusing area. and it's about authors' names in different languages or different romanizations. Now, if the name of a person who has used more than one language appears in different language forms in his or her works, the rule calls for choosing the form corresponding to the language of most of the works. Okay, so similarly, if you have a name that's written in more than one non-Latin script, you romanize it according to the table for the original language of most of the works. So these two rules are kind of mirror to each other. They are similar. They carry similar principles. It's called for the form corresponding to the language of most of the author's works. Now, in this example here, the cataloger has done research, and it shows that the author writes predominantly in Mongolian. So the Mongolian form should be or is used in the 100 heading form here. So the cataloger did a good job choosing the correct heading form. Now, this can be confusing, as I said at the beginning of this slide, from time to time. Remember, it's the form corresponding to the language of the works that dictates the 100 heading form, not necessarily the language of the person's nationality. So keep that in mind. I think you will find it a lot easier when choosing the 100 heading form. Non-Latin reference guidelines. There hasn't been any update on the current guideline due to RDA, so nothing seems new to you about the guideline. But do you know that you cannot add the non-Latin script references to the 100 or 500 field? This is my second point here showing you this is incorrect because the 100 and 500 are the authorized heading forms. So in other words, you cannot add the non-Latin script reference in those two fields. More on the non-Latin script reference guidelines. Although the pre-population only provided non-Latin references for personal names and corporate bodies tagged 110, now catalogers can add non-Latin references for conferences, geographic names, uniform titles, etc., etc. So across the spectrum, all types of name authority records. What happened after OCLC pre-population? We all know the pre-population added the non-Latin script references through the machine automatically. But remember, those non-Latin references were not added in the 670 field. So in other words, the result is that the 400 non-Latin fields do not necessarily represent the names that's represented in the 100 field. So it's all the 400 references added automatically by the machine. There isn't any justification in the 670 field, and the result is the record do not or does not necessarily represent just one author. Working with existing name authority records. Now, if you encounter, because we mentioned earlier about machine maneuvered project that added all the cross-references in the 400, because of that situation, errors happen. For example, you may see non-Latin characters that were added to the record represent totally different sounding name for the name authority record that you are looking at, and sometimes you might see incorrect character either caused by inputting catalogers or system generated errors. When you find obvious errors, correct them, but be careful. Some of the variant forms need to be retained, such as the two examples shown here, simplified and traditional characters, variant Hangul forms. These do need to be retained. Working with existing name authority records. Now, NACO libraries are urged when you encounter a name authority record that is coded as a differentiated personal name. If you see that the record no longer represents one single personal name, the two, for example, the two 400 fields that are showing here now represent more than one person. So in that case, the catalogers are encouraged or urged to change the coding, which is showing here in the red circle in the fixed field, to B, to reflect it's a undifferentiated heading. Okay, so if you can and have information available to differentiate one of the people that's covered in the record, follow normal procedures to remove the reference for a different person to another name authority record from this undifferentiated record. So we'll have an example showing you how this is handled. Now let's take a look what the cataloger has done in this example. First, the cataloger created a new authority record, which is a differentiated heading for this author. And he or she took out the 670 field from the previous undifferentiated record. Now, you notice that the author who wrote the work in the 670 field here actually has a different non-Latin script name, which is not represented in either of the 400 fields in the undifferentiated record. So this is another little trick here, but I want to mention it to you in case you get confused. Okay, so this is the first step the cataloger has taken by creating a differentiated new name authority record. Now, let's take a look at what the cataloger did in the next step. Now, in such a situation where the 670 field is lacking to support, now we know the 670 field has been taken to the differentiated authority record. So what's left in this authority record is without 670 field. So in this situation, when the 670 field is lacking to support the non-Latin data, after that existing 670, remember the existing 70 has been removed to the differentiated authority record, the catalogers are encouraged to look for bibliographic records which apply for the non-Latin fields and add them to the undifferentiated record, which is showing here. Okay, so in this case, there was enough bibliographic information in OCLC that the cataloger concluded that the heading without the date did stand for two separate or two different people. So the cataloger provided the accurate pairs of 670 fields. Okay, and to make this a complete undifferentiated authority record. So this is a very nicely done record. This is something I just, explain to you how this situation is handled, and we do not have specific guidelines to require our NACO catalogers to do this, but hopefully by doing this, you will see the advantages of enhancing the entire authority database. So again, as I mentioned, this is how the problem or the situation is handled. It's not required that you do this process, but hopefully you will be able to take on this more or less. Things to be considered in the future guideline. So what's next in the future guideline? Because of the RDA testing and implementation, the guideline is again delayed. But we hope the future guideline will consider some of the following areas. For example, can we give the non-Latin data for the title citation in the 670 field? Can we give the non-Latin script data in the higher body in the references? Similarly, how about the name, title, uniform authority record? What about the Romanized tag title, which sometimes you see in the C subfield in the 100 in some of the records, or even the qualifiers in the name authority records? So these questions are not answered, and we hope we will see some of the solutions in the future upcoming guidelines. Documentation. Here are the two directions or URLs that can take you to the documentation page. So you can check them out if you need to. Last but not least, whenever you add 400 fields or even 500 fields, depending on what records you are working with, but make sure you search all the references that you are adding to avoid the conflict, and always keep NACO normalization in mind. With that, we conclude what we need to cover in this recorded session on NACO CGK personal name references. Thank you.